As the only inhabited planet, we've always been responsible for keeping track of everything in the solar system. It was simple. 1 sun, 9 planets. But now we may have to rethink everything.
It's time to acquire a more enlightened understanding of the solar system.
An entire planet could be wiped off the solar system map.
Pluto should not be considered as the 9th planet.
It's either that or you think it's the weirdest, freakiest, craziest planet. That's an old idea, it's just wrong.
The time may have come to say goodbye to planet Pluto. On a wintry New York day, one man decided he couldn't live with our vision of the solar system anymore. In the biggest space museum in the city, Dr. Neil Tyson was about to perform planetary homicide. His victim, Pluto.
We got in big trouble when we did this because families would come and say, "Where's Pluto? I don't see Pluto." And we said, "You're right, Pluto's not there." I have a file in my drawer of letters from angry children saying, "Please, Dr. Tyson, don't demote Pluto. It's our favorite planet." There's schools that were taking votes. There were arguments and debates.
Dr. Tyson ignored the outcry. He was convinced Pluto didn't deserve the privilege of planethood.
Were we to put Pluto, then we ought to put the 5 moons that are bigger than Pluto. You didn't know that, did you? Our moon is bigger than Pluto, and so are a whole bunch of other moons. So if we're ranking in size order, Pluto would still not be there. Pluto being mostly ice is kind of safe out there in the outer solar system. But if you found a way to bring it to like where Earth is right now, the heat from the sun would evaporate the ice, and it would grow a tail. Now, what kind of behavior is that for a planet? That would just be embarrassing.
There was no way Neil was going to have Pluto hanging alongside his proper planets. It was a radical idea, but as far as New York was concerned, planet Pluto was dead. There was no one to stop this planetary demotion, no one to save Pluto from oblivion, because nobody knows exactly what a planet should be. Not even the professionals.
If it's only Mercury-sized, I might not bother calling that a planet. If it's as big as the Earth, yes.
A planet is something you can visit.
What is the fundamental characteristic of a planet?
It's a question to which I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
When you say planet, you don't necessarily exclude anything that goes around the sun.
I also don't want to go down in history as being one of the stupid astronomers that can't tell what a planet is, for crying out loud.
It's a mess in desperate need of a solution. And there's only one place to start.
I spy in the night sky, don't I? V-B-I-O-L-R-A, Callisto.
On the east coast of America lies the headquarters of the solar system. Every object in our astronomical backyard should be in Brian Marsden's continually adapted and updated records. Whenever anyone spots anything new in the sky, it's reported to Brian and his team here at the Minor Planet Center.
The observations come actually to all of the people here, including Gareth here, who's having a drink of soda. But he's been working hard, as you can see, as usual.
I'm just deciding a new code to an amateur in Italy.
Very good.
Assuming that his observations are good enough.
Yes, do check them out first. You can't trust these new observers sometimes.
As well as the 9 planets, Brian has tens of thousands of asteroids and comets on his books.
No good ones today.
Well, one report I just did.
That's good, that's good.
A comet may have split as well.
A comet may have split, yes, they do that all the time.
Every known object in the solar system will be somewhere in the Minor Planet Center's records. So if anyone knows what makes a planet, it should be Brian. But even here, they don't have an up-to-date scientific definition of a planet.
Planet is a concept that astronomers have to deal with, like star and galaxy. Well, we pretty much have defined star and galaxy rather well, but we still had failed to define planet, and really had failed even to consider a definition of planet. But of course that word has changed so much since the old days when the sun and moon were planets and the Earth were not.
While science has been getting its knickers in a twist, there is one small group of scientific outcasts who are convinced they know exactly what a planet is.
Until as recently as the mid-1700s, an astrologer was an astronomer. There was no distinction whatsoever. So all the great astronomers in history, from Kepler to Galileo to Newton, would also cast your horoscope. The two activities were indistinguishable.
Jonathan Cainer's astrological forefathers created the first definition of a planet over 1,000 years ago.
Anything in the sky that moved was a wandering star, and that's what the translation of the word planet from the original Greek actually means. So if it moved, it was a planet, and we didn't know or care how big it was.
The astrologers were eventually abandoned by their scientific brethren.
Ironically, it was Isaac Newton, who was a great mystic himself, who inadvertently led the movement which caused astrology to go one way and astronomy to go another way. So the astronomers all got very snooty and they said, oh no, we're proper scientists. We're only interested in cause and effect and a clockwork world where everything can be explained. And the astrologers were left basically in the realm of being the sidelined nutcases of the world.
The astrologers continued to explain life, love, and happiness, while the astronomers got on with the business of scientifically monitoring the heavens.
Here is Mercury, closest planet to the Sun, and Venus, which I think I've lost. I knew this would happen. The Earth.
By the 17th century, the astronomers were smug. They had sorted the solar system out with 6 planets.
It was very easy in those days. That's all one had to deal with, these 6 original planets.
But then they started building bigger, better telescopes. And things rapidly got out of hand. Those clever astronomers began spotting new objects all over the place.
And then in 1781, William Herschel in Bath, England, discovered the planet Uranus. And then 20 years later, the planet Ceres was discovered. The following year, another one was found, Pallas. And then a year or two after that, Juno, and Vesta was found 3 years after that. So there were 11 planets.
Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta were clearly much smaller than the other planets. Then they found another big planet, Neptune.
Now we had a bit of a problem. There were, 13 planets by this time. But these here were clearly a bit different from the other 8.
These smaller so-called planets were demoted.
The term minor planet seems to have been invented at the beginning of 1853, the implication therefore being that the other 8 are major planets. And I think that was a great step forward, quite frankly. In fact, by the end of the 19th century, there were what, if this works, yes, 500 or so minor planets between Mars and Jupiter.
All the little objects surrounded by other stuff became minor planets, also known as asteroids. The 8 big things, on their own, were planets. It was that simple. 1 asteroid belt, 8 planets. Then, in 1929, scientists got a new toy. The Lowell Observatory built a big, shiny telescope in a forest in northern Arizona. They wanted to do the definitive search of the sky. To lead the mammoth search, they hired a 22-year-old farm boy. Clyde Tombaugh's tedious task was to take pictures of the stars with large photographic plates, then compare them from one night to the next. At the Lowell Observatory, Mark Bowie still has the original blink comparator used by Tombaugh.
This machine works by taking 2 images of the sky, these big glass plates on here, one taken at one time and the next one taken 2 hours, a day later, something like that. You get to look at a tiny little postage stamp at one time, looking for something that's moving.
The reason they'd hired a 22-year-old farm boy is that to analyze the whole sky would take about 20 years, and no real astronomers could be bothered. But Tombaugh kept scanning hundreds of photographs, looking for any tiny dots that changed position from one night to the next.
You have to kind of get into a rhythm with this thing, and you got to be very methodical, which I'm not being. And so this is not the sort of thing that you can easily just... When Tombaugh was doing this, no one had ever looked at these plates before. He was the one that took these images in the dead of night, dragged them down, processed them, dried them off, and wondering just, what do I got here? And every time you look through this and you see something new, something moving, it's like, wow, what's that? And your heart leaps to your throat and you wonder, is this it?
In all his painstaking work, just one photograph finally showed something moving on the edge of the solar system.
Ah, here we are.
Tombaugh had found an object no one else on planet Earth had ever seen.
This is the plate where the first image of Pluto was taken. It's been repackaged, but the original worn-out envelope is taped on the back with Clyde Tombaugh's original handwriting. It's kind of interesting noting he's found 8 other asteroids, 7 variable stars, 12 temporary objects, and finally Planet X, Pluto.
Tombaugh had found a big, lonely rock on the edge of the solar system. Everyone was convinced it was a planet, the last one in our neighborhood. The world went Pluto mad. School children began memorizing the names of 9 planets. A new element, plutonium, was born. And one guy even borrowed the name for his dog. Clyde Tombaugh was a hero.
I had no idea that 2 little tiny black specks on some glass plates would cause this much of a ruckus.
The solar system was sorted. There was no need to look for new planets. Pluto was the end of the line.
I want to turn to the outermost planet, and that is Pluto.
Shall we move on to the planets?
Well, the planets, there are 9 of them altogether.
For over 50 years, everyone was happy.
Pluto?
Pluto?
Yes, Pluto.
The 9th planet.
Pluto's a lifeless rock.
But one man thought we'd got it all horribly wrong.
I don't intentionally do things that are different, but I do try to be skeptical of everything, because I think that's essential for science. So if you just buy into the prevailing wisdom, then all you can ever do is confirm what's already known.
Dave Jewett had a problem with Pluto. A hunch that it wasn't a lonely planet surrounded by empty space. He was convinced the astronomers had put down their telescopes too soon.
The thing that made it seem worthwhile was the realization that, well, it could be there's really nothing there, but it's much more likely that it's apparently empty because nobody has looked hard enough to find the objects which are there.
So he headed to the mountaintop of Mauna Kea, home to some of the best telescopes in the world. It's one of the highest places on Earth, perfect for seeing to the edge of the solar system, but a little less perfect for life in general.
Mauna Kea, 14,000 feet tall, very, very high and dry site, is not a comfortable site to observe. So typically you have a tremendous headache. At least I always have a tremendous headache on Mauna Kea.
Only one other astronomer could be persuaded to brave the elements in search of Pluto's undiscovered neighbors.
Session of torture. There's not much oxygen. You don't sleep well. You don't eat well.
You begin to dehydrate, so your nose dries out, and then you have bleeding inside your nose because the dry mucus basically cuts the blood vessels in your nose.
It's painful as hell, but still, you knew that this was the best site on Earth.
Okay, so here's the control room, as you know.
The painful
It's
memories.
the Dave Woodworth control seat. Nothing changed on the board.
Same pictures?
Yep.
Dave Jewett and Jane Lou didn't know if they were looking for a planet or an asteroid. But if they could stumble on one object out near Pluto, they'd have proved the outer solar system was still worth investigating. They spent long nights in this telescope control room, searching the sky, one tiny postage stamp at a time.
At first, I couldn't get money to support any of this because it seemed, I guess, so speculative or so crazy, and so instead I used money from other sources, probably illegally.
They started asking, oh, well, when are you going to stop? You know, you've been doing it for years now. You still haven't found anything, and or maybe there isn't anything out there.
If you keep getting the big fat zero, then they don't want to give you more and more time. So we began to shade the truth by asking for time for other projects, but in fact we would do the survey project when we got to the telescope.
It's not fun, but
You sort of-
you see asteroids, and you do see moving things.
It's
and,
fascinating.
And you get excited. You say, "Oh, was that a slow-moving thing?" And she said, "No, that was just a cosmic ray."
Yeah.
It's really not as stultifyingly boring as it sounds.
This is the CCD control computer.
Finally, after 1,437 days, Dave and Jane spotted something strange lurking on the edge of the solar system.
He said, "Jane, come take a look at this." And we saw something, and it was moving at about the right speed. We would expect a distant solar system object would move.
So we're instantly pretty excited about that because we hadn't seen any other candidate object so good.
It was just the first positive sign that we got after 5 years.
And so we thought at that point, yeah, we've got it nailed.
The 5 years, slightly dodgy funding, and nosebleeds had all been worth it. Pluto had a neighbor. It was the first discovery in the outer solar system for 60 years. They called it 1992 QB1. A new frontier had opened up on the edge of the solar system.
The announcement that when Dave Jewett and Jane Lou discovered their first Kuiper Belt object out there was fantastic. What it meant, and most people knew this right away, it meant that we were opening up a new avenue of exploration in the solar system.
Pluto devotee Mark Bowie was determined not to be left behind.
I like the romantic mystique about the West. And if you think about it in that terms, the outer solar system where Pluto is sort of like the last frontier in the solar system. It's the place that we know the least about.
It soon became clear that Pluto was far from alone.
I've put together a crude scale model of the solar system. This big, massive rock over here is the sun. And then, roughly here, we have Pluto. That was the picture that we had of the outer solar system up to the early 90s. Then, in 1992, Jewett discovered one object out here in the outer solar system. Finding that one object said that we had this whole population of objects out there. And now, some 15 years later, we've been finding more and more objects.
3.5 billion miles from Earth, it now seemed Pluto had hundreds of neighbors. It was in the middle of a vast string of asteroids that circled the sun.
So you can see now that Pluto has got lots of company in the outer solar system now.
They called it the Kuiper Belt. And even in just the small part Mark had examined, there were hundreds of Kuiper Belt objects.
Dave worked for 3 or 4 years to find the first object. We use a telescope that's twice as big across as what Dave used to discover these things. And every other picture we take, we find a new KBO. It takes us, in effect, 20 minutes to find a new KBO.
Now here is a circular that was put out at 2054. There's another one at 2052. Here's one at 1707. Every few hours, or sometimes few minutes, we're putting circulars out.
For 60 years, there had been just one asteroid belt. Now, the arrival of the Kuiper Belt meant Brian Marsden had a whole new region of space to cope with. The Minor Planet Center was drowning in new discoveries.
This is a whole month's supply of circulars about interesting objects. And bear in mind that the interesting objects are about 1/10 of 1%. This was the October batch. It's in two parts, there were so many of them. And here is the November batch. And here we go up to number 120,457.
They were feeling the pressure in Solar System headquarters. In 27 years, the number of Solar System objects had grown from only 2,000 to over 120,000. The Kuiper Belt was just the final straw.
We really are in bad shape, I would say, and it's really rather ridiculous to consider that 4 people are trying to cover the whole subject. We're going to crack one of these days because we're going to revolt and decide we aren't going to work 80 or 100 hours a week. If all of us did it, then clearly the place would crack. Of course, that would be the day somebody would find something heading straight at us. And it would come maybe on a Friday evening, and long holiday weekend, nobody would know about it till Tuesday morning, unless, of course, it hit the Earth on Sunday and nobody saw it coming.
Assuming the Minor Planet Center was still standing on Monday morning, Brian thought it was time to reassess the solar system map. The discovery of the Kuiper Belt had forced him to put forward a controversial suggestion about planet Pluto.
Pluto is not alone. Pluto is lost in the mess out here. In a way, it's like Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta that were called planets for a while until it was realized that there were a large number of objects here, and they were then called minor planets. I think the same thing should be done with Pluto. Pluto should not be considered as the 9th planet.
Brian thought Pluto was just another asteroid in the Kuiper Belt. And he wasn't alone.
We always say we found +1 Kuiper Belt and -1 planet. And the one we lost, of course, is Pluto.
It's just much more consistent to just call them all Kuiper Belt objects because they all have the same origin, and some got bigger than others. But other than that, there's really nothing that special about Pluto.
It's either that or you think it's the weirdest, freakiest, craziest planet. That's an old idea, it's just wrong.
Pluto was the only planet covered in ice. And it was tiny. Smaller than Earth, smaller even than the United States. It seemed Pluto really might be just another rock. And that's why, in Dr. Tyson's museum, Pluto is a Kuiper Belt object, not a planet.
Ever since we made this decision about the exhibits, the mail has been coming in continuously.
What did I think Pluto is instead of a planet? A moon? An asteroid?
Usually it's a stack of mail gathered together from an entire science class who are trying to duke it out. And by the way, right on down to like 2nd and 3rd grade, like in pencil, barely spelling words correctly.
Well, they already discovered it and they already made it, so I don't think it's a very good idea.
It's got lots of geographical features of the other planets, and I think it should still be a planet.
There's one of my favorite letters. There's a kid, I think in 3rd grade, who says, Dr. Tyson, you're missing Pluto in your exhibit. By the way, here's a drawing of Pluto in case you want to know what it looks like. And he got out his purple crayon and drew it. So people care.
Pluto is too round to actually be an asteroid or a moon.
Suppose we reclassified Neptune. Do you think anybody would care? Actually, I don't think so. So there's something about Pluto.
The 3rd graders weren't going to have to fight for Pluto on their own. 16 years ago, a group of passionate Pluto supporters had gathered in an Italian cafe. They were astronomers who had been studying the littlest planet for their entire careers. They had one aim: to right the wrongs that had been done to Pluto. They were the Pluto Underground. Pluto had never really been treated like a proper planet. NASA had put telescopes in space and sent probes to explore all the nooks and crannies of the solar system. They had incredibly detailed pictures of every other planet. But in Pluto's 76 years, the best they had done was this: a blurry image from the Hubble telescope.
Everything we know about Pluto today, after 70 years of straining against the distance, everything could fit on a few 3x5 cars, just a few notes.
Alan Stern and his Pluto Underground were determined to persuade NASA to send a probe to Pluto.
What this is about is we have to come up with $1 billion. How do you do that? And the first thing we had to do was to get NASA to make a study. So I went to see the director of Solar System Exploration Division. I said, something I want to ask you. I was a graduate student at the time. He said, what's that? I said, there's a group of us that would like to know why you've never studied a mission to Pluto. And he said, well, nobody's ever asked me that before. He said, maybe that's a good idea. How many people are interested? I said, it's really exciting stuff. There are a lot of people who are interested. He said, prove it. Here we are, Launch Complex 41.
The Pluto Underground undertook a mammoth letter-writing campaign. They finally convinced NASA to give Pluto the same treatment as the other planets.
See the sign on the side of them, they're ready to fly. It says loaded. Yeah, Manny, do you know which boot is being replaced? Tony, one of you guys know? Is this one?
16 years after the Pluto Underground was born, Alan Stern was no longer the disgruntled graduate student. He was head of NASA's most adventurous scientific mission.
Come out here, you can look up, you see about, maybe 30-40% of the way up the vehicle. That's 21 stories high. It's 205 feet to the tip.
They were about to embark on a 10-year journey to the littlest planet.
This is the tip of the spear. The spacecraft is sitting here inside the nose cone, so to speak, inside the fairing, sleeping, unpowered, waiting for us to power it up for liftoff.
As far as NASA was concerned, planet Pluto was very much on the map.
It's a little surreal. There's not much time to contemplate. There's a lot to do still. It should feel more momentous, but I don't think I'll feel it's real until I see it flying.
What are you going to do for the 10 years till it gets there?
Vacation in Spain.
There were still those who thought Pluto was an overgrown asteroid. But the Pluto Underground didn't think being in the Kuiper Belt should stop Pluto being a planet.
All of a sudden, just because of where it is, it's not a planet anymore? That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't matter where Pluto is. That's an issue of real estate. That would be like classifying you as a Brit and me as an American. But that's not the kind of object you are. You're a human being, and so am I.
The Kuiper Belt still hadn't been fully explored. No one was quite sure what else might be out there. And there was one astronomer who was determined to find out. Mike Brown wanted to do something that hadn't been done for 70 years. He wanted to find himself a planet.
It was very clear to, I think, everyone that it was likely that there were objects larger than Pluto to be found out there. And the trick was not whether or not they were there, but the trick was how were you going to find them.
Mike hatched an ingenious plan. First, he found a telescope.
This telescope, which is a fantastic telescope, was going to be sitting idle starting in about a year. And I don't know how long it took for it to click, but it was very clear that this is the perfect telescope to use to do a big survey of the Kuiper Belt.
Next, he recruited one of astronomy's best cameramen.
My job was to build the camera and keep it working, get all the data. If you go to most large telescopes at observatories, the amount of sky that they actually look at when they take an exposure is actually extremely small. The size of your fingernail on the sky is about the largest most people ever see in one exposure. And our camera sees something about the size of your hand.
There was one crucial last stage in the plan. Mike Brown wanted to search every single scrap of sky.
A survey like this, you cannot do it unless it's automated. If you did like Clyde Tombaugh and blinked every single image, I did a calculation once, it would take us something like 80 years to do this survey, and that would be 8-hour days and no weekends.
The final element was to persuade computer guru Chad Trujillo to join his scheme.
After the PhD, you never know what you're going to get into, and it was pretty exciting to be able to work with Mike because I knew this was going to be, exactly the kind of thing I was interested in. But we didn't know at the time whether we might find something bigger than Pluto or not.
Everything was in place. 100 miles away, all Mike Brown had to do was sit back and wait.
I haven't been to the telescope to work on this survey ever.
Night after night, the giant telescope would wake up of its own accord and sweep one small section of the sky. Everything discovered in the solar system so far, planets and asteroids, was in a flat plane called the ecliptic. So the telescope started looking in this strip of sky where all the planets lived. Soon, Mike started receiving emails with images of potential new objects.
It shows me those maybe 100 images where it thinks something is moving. Most of the time, it's not real, and I look at it very quickly. It takes me about a second for each one, and I say, that's not real, that's not real, that's not real. And occasionally, we find ones that really are. You can see a little dot moving across the sky, and we then immediately flag those as real objects.
Some of their discoveries were Kuiper Belt objects larger than anyone had seen before. But so far, they had found nothing as big as Pluto.
Status check for continuing the countdown. Umbilical retract. Go. Alice LO2. Go. Alice propulsion. Go. Flight control.
What Pluto lovers feared most was the discovery of a Kuiper Belt object bigger than Pluto.
This is LD, NASA New Horizons, or go for launch.
Roger.
If Pluto wasn't even the biggest thing in the Kuiper Belt, how could it be a planet?
Yes, sir. Are you configured for launch? The spacecraft is configured for launch. New Horizons is go.
With a 10-year journey ahead, NASA might find they'd spent $700 million on a visit to a rather ordinary asteroid. But the Pluto Underground had one last trick up their sleeve. They had a definition of a planet that would ensure Pluto's status no matter what else was discovered.
I believe the definition for planet should be as simple as possible. That's what makes it a good definition. Can't be big enough to burn its own matter. That's what a star does. On the small end, I think the boundary between a planet and not a planet should be, is the gravity of the object stronger than the strength of the material of the object? That's a fancy way of saying, is it round?
If you ask a kid, you say, draw me a picture of a planet, they always draw you a circle because the children know very well what a planet is. It's big enough to be round. They'll never draw you a triangle. They'll never draw you an octahedron or anything else. It's always a sphere.
It seemed a perfectly reasonable scientific definition. There was only one problem. It wasn't just Pluto that was big enough to be round.
If your concept of a planet is size related, and Pluto is a planet, then what of our moon, which is bigger than Pluto? Why not call it a planet?
If roundness made a planet, we'd have to include our moon, some of Jupiter's moons, some of Saturn's moons, Pluto's own moon, and quite a few asteroids, which means a lot more than 9 planets. The astronomers had reached a stalemate.
In a strict scientific definition, there should be 8.
If you go counting, you'll find an answer around 20.
By my definition of planet, our solar system, as best we know, contains about 30 planets.
Yeah, I would say the 8 planets. and then let the hate mail come.
If you could come up with a definition for planet that is meaningful and simple, that doesn't include Pluto, it's like, well, okay, fine, that's the way it is. I don't think that's going to happen.
It seemed better just to leave Pluto as the one rogue planet, rather than to have to start promoting moons. Pluto had been saved because no one could agree. And that might have been the end of it. While the astronomers argued, the rest of planet Earth was carrying on as normal. Safe in the knowledge the solar system was just as they had learnt at school. There were 9 planets, with Pluto the furthest from the sun. Even Mike Brown's mammoth sky search hadn't turned up anything bigger than Pluto. Every morning the telescope would still send him emails about moving objects, but they all turned out to be planes or birds or run-of-the-mill asteroids. Or at least they did, until January the 5th, 2005.
The first thing that I thought of when I first got to this picture is, am I looking at the right data? And I realized this is the right data.
When he found it, he was flabbergasted, and he sent email to us right away.
New bright object. Please sit down and take a deep breath.
Mike tends to embellish things when it's more exciting, so either, take a seat.
I have not told anyone except for you guys. Well, and my wife.
He found something that, at first glance, from one night's observation, showed it to be very distant and yet very bright. And that combination tells you that you found something extraordinary right away.
I think we should keep this the biggest secret we've ever had in our lives, bigger than the fact that my wife is pregnant, which I hardly told anyone.
They didn't want to tell anyone yet, because this object was too weird to be believed. It was in the wrong place, miles from where all the other planets lived, 45 degrees from the normal plane of the solar system. They had to be sure what they'd seen was real.
What we do is we go back and look at archives of data, and I email Mike and I say, hey, look, this is the newest orbit, and then Mike takes a look at that, and he's looking, I'm looking, and David Rabinowitz is looking.
He told me where it was, where it should have been earlier, went back and we found it right away, and at that point, we knew it was real. And eventually we can trace it back 20 years, and I think it's pretty interesting that, although we were the first ones to discover the object, many people from many different telescopes all around the world have been taking pictures of this object and not realizing that it was there.
No one else had realized the significance of this tiny dot. Only Mike and his team had looked at it more closely and realized it was moving. They had found a truly extraordinary object in the far reaches of our solar system. It's 3 times further from the sun than Pluto. It's a frozen body covered in solid natural gas. Its winter lasts hundreds of years. And 2003 UB313 is definitely bigger than Pluto. But is it a planet?
The logically consistent thing would be to either have 2003 UB313 a planet and Pluto be a planet, or have neither be a planet.
I hope we find plenty of objects bigger than Pluto. If they're made of ice and they're out there beyond Neptune, they are Kuiper Belt objects. Get over it.
The Pluto problem was back. It was time to call in the high priests of planetary authority, the International Astronomical Union.
They're the governing body for astronomy. They're the people who make the rules on how you name everything in the universe, from mountains on Mars to stars that you find in other galaxies. So they're the ones who have the final decision on what is 2003 UB313, and then who gets to name it.
But the IAU is having trouble making a decision, because they're also stuck on the definition of a planet.
You want to know what's happening in the IAU right now? I have no idea, because they are behind closed doors. But I tell you this, if they open the doors and say, well, we have sentimental concerns for the usage of the word planet. Pluto's been a planet for 60 years. We like that. Let's continue so we don't upset school children. I'm not changing this exhibit.
The International Astronomical Union says they will announce an official definition of a planet in September. Until then, we're back where we started.
The word planet is defunct. Give me some fresh words to now talk about what we have going on in the solar system.
It may be some time before the dust settles.
I'm compromising. Don't you think I'm compromising on this? Yes, sure, I'd like 8, and that would make life very simple, but I'm looking for other possibilities.
I think if the IU came out with a decision that said it's not a planet, they would be ignored. And I would certainly be leading the charge.
Venus, Earth, Mars.
Whatever happens, 9 planets is no longer an option. We could end up with over 20.
Rocky planets, Sedna, Quoa, Persephone, Jovian planets, ice dwarf planets.
Or Pluto could be lost in the history books, like Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta. Until we get the official decision, there's just one person who can tell us what the future holds for Pluto.
How old is Pluto today? Pluto is now 76, isn't it? So if this was a person, would they suddenly find, age 76, that the whole world didn't believe in them anymore? As I look at this chart of Pluto's discovery, I am inclined to feel very strongly that it will remain a planet and remain a very strong influence for thousands of years to come.
Next week on Horizon, We Love Cigarettes. The story of one day in the life of our planet's passionate but untimely fatal attraction to the cigarette.
Life, the universe, and everything about hitchhiker's legend Douglas Adams in 10 minutes. Mastermind on BBC Two after a reminder of what the ancients did for us.